We should use the term Kemet rather than the term Egypt because that is the name that the Kemetic people use to refer to themselves. The name Egypt was used by Greek people and is therefore a foreign name, not a native African or a native Egyptian name.
Listervelt Middleton, one of the leading educational television producers on African history.
Why is ancient Kemet so important to the world and to black people, African people in particular?
Ancient Kemet is important because it's humankind's oldest civilization. It's the development of the best effort of a group of people to organize themselves. And for Africa, that's especially important since African people have been so defamed, even to the extent that some have said that African people had no civilization. In fact, African people developed the first civilization, which was Kemet. It is as important to African people as Greece is to European people.
What did these Africans develop in the way of science?
Well, of course, in the development of civilization, we would refer to Kemet as a high technical civilization. The sciences, as we know them, were well advanced in Kemet. Thousands of years before they had that kind of development before. The art of writing, astronomy, music, any area that we now consider to be an important academic area already had its beginning in Kemet, and it was very well developed.
Now, you know, a lot of African Americans watching this will say now, what do the descendants of African slaves in the United States have to do with these ancient Africans in Kemet or Egypt?
Well, it's important for any group of people to have a sense of, or to have the ability to answer three questions about themselves. And these questions are Booker T. Washington Coleman, a Washington, D.C. historian's questions that he uses in organizing his educational experiences for children. He says every human being ought to be able to answer the question, who am I? Where in the world am I? How in the world did I get here? Now, most well-developed nations spend millions, maybe billions of dollars answering those questions for themselves. That's why you have Smithsonian Institution for the United States. That's why you have libraries. That's why you have universities that invest in history departments and so forth. African people have almost forgotten because we haven't had the resources to take care of that part of our existence. It is the knowledge of one's history that gives a strong sense of belonging and identity, which provides the basis for group unity, which provides the basis for political and economic power.
What is the connection, the genetic connection, the cultural connection between the Africans who are now in the United States and those of ancient Kemet or Egypt?
Well, it's fairly clear that the pattern of movement of people on the African continent, and it moves from...
we'll go to the map.
It moves from beginnings here in the Nile Valley beginnings, where the Nile River actually starts right here, and it will go down here, joined by another Nile, the blue Nile coming from Ethiopia, the white Nile coming from here, joining here and coming this way. So the migration pattern of human beings was down this river into Egypt, and then there were migration patterns over into West Africa many times, and some of the time the migration actually went from Egypt across the top of the Sahara and into these parts. And we believe there are people here now who are quite similar, and probably, as was said in the book by Felix Du Bois, Timbuktu the Mysterious, they're probably both the culture and the genetic descendants of the people of Egypt, and they're the Dogon people here in Mali.
Let me ask you to go over that again, just to make sure that we get all of it.
Okay, early man begins here in this area somewhere.
And we're talking about the cultural connection, the genetic connection.
We're talking about the people first, the genetic connection, and then of course they carry their culture down the river. These were black people here. They carried their culture down the river before they went out and populated the rest of the earth. Then, of course, they migrated not only north, but they also migrated from here out into parts of West Africa, into the south. They then also migrated from Egypt, which is here, or Kemet, as we should call it, across the Sahara into areas of West Africa. Mali would be a case in point.
Okay. Now, some African-American parents will say, our children are maiming each other. Our children are on drugs. And here you are talking about ancient African history. Why is this relevant? How do you respond to that?
It's one of the major pieces. It's not the only piece. You can't say that if someone takes a course in chematology that they will stop drugs tomorrow. But you can say that if a group of people has no sense of being a part of the historical world, that is, if we see ourselves as mere spectators, that we just sat on the sidelines as the march of humanity went by, that has an effect on how you live your life. And one way we know this is that we watch what happens when children and adults learn this information about African people. The difference in attitude, the difference in self-esteem, self-concept, self-image, you can almost see those things change before your very eyes.
What are you seeing? What have you seen?
Well, I get letters from young men in prison who, upon reading some of the works of great African historians and seeing some of the illustrations that we have to offer, who are abruptly shocked, changed, and almost put on a new mission. They almost take up a new purpose. And I have many letters like this, as well as people who are well-educated, maybe even people in universities and colleges who have spent 20 and 30 years in their discipline, but when they learn this information, they talk about having a transformation experience, and they are very explicit about how these things affect them. So, you know, we have abundant examples of how this works, and it would be really wonderful to figure out a way to be able to show that.
Okay. Now, master keys to the interpretation of data on Kemet. What is this concept of master keys, and how did you arrive at it?
Okay, the idea of a master key is simply that in the face of the fact that there is so much information on ancient Kemet, so much information on Africa for that matter, and it comes to us in bits and pieces, like little episodes. In order to give a sense of order and coherence to it, it's necessary to identify certain key concepts, key principles, guiding ideas that will organize all of this information so that it makes some sense to the person who is trying to comprehend it.
It's a study tool.
It's a study tool, a guide for the analysis of information, right.
Okay. Let's take a look at the first graphic.
Kemetic culture was pre-dynastic. Let me go to the timeline for this because it's...
Okay. Let us wait a minute for the time, okay.
Okay, here we have a time chart that shows this line here, which is a line that starts way before 3000 BC, and it comes to a period of time after Christ. And this is the line of culture showing that the way of life of the ancient Kemites remained the same for over 3,000 years. This, of course, is their political control. Now, these are the 4 golden ages of ancient Kemet. But this is the dynastic period that begins here, after which we have these 4 golden ages. When we say pre